I hope you caught the word was a cheerleader like 20 years ago, in case you haven't figured that out yet. Thank you so much to my sponsors and supporters here too, and following Arturo is going to be very, very difficult, but I'll give it my best shot. You have a long hour with me, so I would love for everybody to just stand up for a minute, take a sip of your coffee. You're gonna wake up. Heather might be I'm gonna introduce Heather later. She's also a former NFL cheerleader who's gone on to a science field. But so, put your hands together. We gotta start with a cheer. When I say go, you say science. Go! Science. Go! When I say go, you say science. Science! 20 years, give me a break. Okay, here we have another one. 2, 4, 6, 8. What do we appreciate?
Science. Science.
And then when we have a math conference, we love to pull out 2, 4, 6, 8 equals 20. All right, we're awake. Sit down. Thank you very much. We'll get started. So as Amy mentioned, this is very personal for me. I was working at Discover magazine, then owned by the Walt Disney Company, for a number of years, and the editor-in-chief challenged me to really think about what we were doing, what I was doing. I would preach about why it's so important to be science literate, set up all the education programs for the Walt Disney Company related to STEM in schools and elsewhere. And I had the spiel down, like, it's important because X, Y, Z. And he said, and how about for you, Darlene? You didn't go on to be a teacher or a scientist or a policymaker. You're business development. Occasionally I was writing for the magazine as well. There must be a deeper connection for you, and you represent millions of other people who are left at the door if you do not go into those majors. Yes, you can become a much more well-rounded critical thinker, which is certainly important, but there must be deeper connections. And if there's not, then we need to change our pitch about why it's important to be science literate and why we're investing so much in science literacy in grade schools. So it inspired me to go to graduate school. I live in Philadelphia, so I enrolled in an MLA program at the University of Pennsylvania and immediately found a connection through what's known as citizen science. It's a much more common term now than it was when I was in grad school. But it was people like me without formal science degrees actually getting involved in research projects, real research projects, not just for the sake of learning, but adding value to professional researchers' work that they were doing. About the same time I was actually assigned to write about the rise and the fall of the Office of Technology Assessment. Anybody remember that agency? Congressional agency, shut down by Newt Gingrich in 1994 or 1995. But when it was alive, it was vibrant. It worked for Congress. It was Congress's sole source of unbiased scientific input, and it worked really well. They put out over 755 reports, and I was so into this. I read every report. I read the legislative language. I talked to the original architects of this and wondered what happened to that one important line in the original legislative language that called for citizen input. That went away quickly, and it just became the experts at the table advising Congress, especially on matters of technology assessment. So while our OTA dwindled, other nations were starting their own. And they actually took that line very seriously. Citizen input became a very important part of their policy-making process. So this is known as participatory technology assessment. And other nations were doing it just fine. So in my mind, I kept thinking, we have all these citizen scientists out there. Wouldn't they be a good source of this citizen input if we were to be able to reopen the Office of Technology Assessment? I was incredibly naive because I thought, I'll just go meet with people in Congress and say, you should reopen the OTA. And just include some public participation. You can use those citizen scientists over there, and then I'll be done. And that was, basically 5 years later, 20 years older, spawned 3 startups. You'll see how this relates to what's known as the Science Cheerleaders. They basically became the hook to attract wide audiences, new audiences, to this idea that you are valued even without a professional science degree. It's more than just the fact that you're paying for research through your tax dollars. And you should be well informed to be able to have some policy impact on who you're voting for and the issues that you're voting for. But that you're actually valued, that the local knowledge that you have, your value, they all come into play. Science policy is never, hardly ever, value neutral, right? So it's not a bad idea to just consider for a moment experts together and having public deliberations as a complementary tool to help the policymakers make the right decisions and make smarter decisions. And we have 15 years of experience to draw upon from other nations that are doing this well. So this is how the Science Cheerleaders came to be. This is how a startup known as SciStarter came to be. This is a site that aggregates more than 600 citizen science opportunities for people to get involved in. And this is how a network known as ECAST, and this is usually where I put people to sleep at a dinner party, Arturo, when I get into the policy part of it. Everybody's all excited about the cheerleaders, and then I start talking about the policy, and suddenly it's time to go. So I saved that for the end here. Before I go on too much further, I will let my friends explain a little bit more about Science Cheerleader and how we came to be. And let's see if I can get this right.
This is the Science Cheerleader.
Sir, who do you represent?
I'm with the status quo. We feel that science is part of an exclusive club, and we'd like to keep it that way.
Science Cheerleader, who do you represent?
Average citizens and science.
She was a cheerleader.
According to this, she's a cheerleader with a master's degree.
And an agenda.
And what's that?
To bring science to the people.
Yeah, and how are you going to do that?
By raising science literacy. By growing the ranks of citizen scientists. And by encouraging citizen involvement in research projects and policy discussions. The Science Cheerleader is here to help bring science to the public.
You know, this could actually lead to a more informed public.
And it all starts at ScienceCheerleader.com.
ScienceCheerleader.com.
The Science Cheerleader, making science sexy.
I love those guys. Of course, that's sticky. And it doesn't say a lot about how we're going to do it. And that's where the devil is always in the details and making that happen. That's why I say I've aged 20 years in 5 years that I've started this campaign. And if you are an expert scientist, part of you must be thinking right now, like, is she insane? Why in the world would she want average people involved in these important policy conversations for some of the reasons that Arturo addressed earlier? But let me just advance some of these slides here. We went through this already, the 3 goals. Sorry for the delay. Should I just say advance? Because this doesn't seem to be working too great. Advance.
You can discuss science all you want. It doesn't matter. The American public is too stupid to understand.
A lot of people think this, right? And with good reason. You see a lot of the stats coming out from the TIMS study, 4th grade, 8th grade, 11th or 12th grade, when we're compared to other nations and how we rank in science and math. And it's horrible. It's embarrassing. It shouldn't be that way. I was completely floored about the next stat. Click. Second. So John Miller at the University of Michigan, and somebody else needs to look into this. I don't have the bandwidth, but somebody really should look into this. He did a similar study looking at adults in the United States, and it's shocking. Second, only to Sweden. Sweden ranked #1. We came in second. There's a lot of reasons behind this, according to him. Chief among them, we're a very well-educated nation, and also we're one of the only countries that require students in a 4-year university to take 2 science courses. So he's actually digging in a little bit more to see, like, that actually might have more influence than anybody suspected. But it's promising. And to me, it's fun to throw out that stat, even though somebody needs to dig a little bit deeper, because it helps take the edge off a little bit. We don't need to be compared to the 4th, 8th, and 12th grade stats coming out. There are issues, of course, that are a little bit more than just scientific knowledge and are just steeped in the values. And so, evolution and climate change, chief among them. But there are so many other policy issues that can be addressed with some public input. Click. These are stats you can look at. My presentation will be available online, I believe. Next. We already said this. Next. This I found important as well. It's not just the information sharing process that is important, right? So this deficit model that we tend to use very much is, I have the information, I'm going to share it with you, therefore you'll be a little bit smarter later. And when I get more information, I'll share it with you, but there's 0 opportunity for you to share your information with me, and that is a major problem. One reason that's a problem is because you can see here from some of this work that's been done is that it does not emotionally engage somebody this way. So it might be short-term information gained, but over the long term, It's not going to matter to you that much. So looking for emotional connections, engagement opportunities, seem to bode very well with this trend in participatory research, also known as crowd science or citizen science. Click. Here's the problem. Even as I, as a graduate student, was studying this and looking for these opportunities, I knew the words to look for, to Google for. And hardly at all would I find, actually, there was no one stop for you to find opportunities to get involved in these projects. So even if you were involved in very specifically looking for wildflower monitoring opportunities, look how many options you have. It's not easy to find these things. So click. That's why I started SciStarter. So SciStarter is an outgrowth of the graduate work that I was doing, originally fit into this blog that I had called Science Cheerleader, mainly because of my background, also just a play on the words there. So I started this project finder, mostly just selfishly trying to keep track of these various opportunities that were available to people so that I knew I was writing about these as a final paper, and I needed to be able to kind of synthesize them and point to these resources. It then became a place that I would point people in Congress to say, there's more people involved in these projects than you probably suspected, more average Americans, more people who can help with some of the trust issues that Arturo was mentioning as well. So that's how SciStarter got started. It was named one of Philadelphia's top 10 tech startups in a couple of summers ago. There's now more than 600 citizen science projects that are in there. These are curated projects. Click. It's a website that connects regular people like me to real science that I can do. Next. Obviously, these are pitch slides. They can't find each other. And this, by the way, is also a great resource for scientists, because this is, dirty words, but it's free labor for them. You need a lot of data collected. Citizen science is a great option for you, for those professional researchers out here. And I'll give you a couple of examples in a minute. Next. So we connect these two populations. I love that there's two women up there. Next. You probably are a citizen scientist, or you know somebody who is. If you are a birder, you are a citizen scientist. If you are somebody who monitors the quality of our nation's rivers, streams, and lakes, you're a citizen scientist. The list goes on and on. It used to really be focused on three areas: bird watching, the water monitoring people, and the amateur astronomers. Those actually still are very popular citizen science categories. But you can see these numbers. eBird is one of the citizen science projects for bird watchers, 1.5 million reports. So these are reports that people submit to this program called eBird. They all came in January. That's 1 month. That's pretty big. This 1.5 million people volunteer to keep track of the quality of water. That's huge. Many of these are organized as grassroots efforts. Later on, the EPA saw the value on this and started creating apps and making it easier for people to share data quality measurements and standards coming in. Next. Usually when I talk about citizen science, people think, oh, that's cute. You're just doing those little rocket kits and sending just things out to help people learn about science. And that is not my goal. It's not to help people. That's a great byproduct. My goal is to make it easy for people to find a connection to science. Next. You can look through these, but these are great examples of just kind of the growth in the areas and the differences that the citizen scientists are making. Next. Galaxy Zoo is one of the more popular citizen science projects. Anybody involved in Galaxy Zoo or any of the Zooniverse projects? You might be involved in some of the health-related ones, but this one in particular takes images from NASA. All that stuff is open. And they figured out a way to create an interface that allows the public to help classify these images. And they'll say, here's a picture of a spiral galaxy. Click the images of the spiral galaxy. So this was started by a grad student at Yale who was charged with clicking through these. Click, 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 click. And he said, there must be a better way. He calculated it would take him 40 years working full-time to do the job that he needed to do. Galaxy Zoo, once they put this online, they were featured in BBC, which tends to be important to get some media thrust first. 3 months, it was done. So you'll see the numbers of people. So that now has 800,000 people volunteer for Galaxy Zoo. Next. This is the homepage of SciStarter. This is what it looks like. We've been really lucky to get some support from the National Science Foundation and other organizations, including some of the universities that are looking for new forms of outreach and to get more data collected. Nothing else to say there, really. Actually, there is. The Project Finder. This was important. For people to be able to to be able to search for projects of interest to them, most people don't know that it might be a nature project, or it's an insect project, or it's astronomy. They're not coming at it from there. They're looking at it from a convenience standpoint, or ways to connect socially to like-minded people. So we thought it was very important to be able to search by activity. So you can say, here, you can search, show me what I could do at the beach for 20 minutes. Yes, it would be great if it included kids. And by the way, I want it to be free and on the Jersey coast. And we drill down that way. Next. And it's been incredibly exciting. So these are some of the partnerships that we have. We basically crowdsource the crowdsourcing. So in order for us to look for new audiences, partner, 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 partner. We partner out with people who are already reaching those audiences. We don't need to keep creating new communities. And we don't want the researchers to have to spend a lot of time creating new communities either. This is part of what we offer to them for free. So Pop Warner. It's one of our national partnerships that we have going on. It seems like it's misplaced here, right? This is where the Science Cheerleaders come into play, and I'll explain that a little bit later. But basically, Pop Warner's football and cheerleading organization, 400,000 members, not including all the volunteers that are involved in that organization. They aim for scholarship applications, right? So at the end of the year, everybody's applying for their little scholars program. Anybody here have a child in Pop Warner? Ever been involved in Pop Warner? We gotta talk, people. Okay. They apply for this because they win a big trip down to Walt Disney World, and it's a big thing for them. Well, now, if they do citizen science projects, that counts as credit towards their scholarship applications. That's 400,000 new little faces getting involved in some of these research projects. Plus, we run the blog on the Public Library of Science called Citizen Science. NBA and NFL, I'll tell you how they come into play in a little bit. We have a partnership with the National Science Teachers Association. Super simple. They serve up projects of the week taken from our database. We make recommendations. Here, this is appropriate for middle school. Here's your challenge for the week, high school, college, grade school. And then they do a great job of socially sharing this with their members as well. And of course, Discover Magazine, which is where I still work. And we did a contest with Instructables. We have this whole do-it-yourself community, these maker people who make the most wonderful things, incredibly creative, but it tends to be kind of things that are never applied to anything outside of their garage, their environment there. So what I wanted to do is a very close cousin from a psychodemographic standpoint. Those people who feel like, okay, I don't have an engineering degree, but I feel pretty confident that I can do X, Y, and Z. That's kind of in line with a citizen scientist. Once you get people comfortable with the idea, letting them know that they really are valued and they're needed for some of this stuff. Once they get their feet wet with these projects, it goes on and it goes on and it goes on. So what we wanted to try to do is say to the makers, you are making things that actually can be applied for these research projects. For example, there's a citizen science project out of, I want to say it's NC's North Carolina State, but I'm not entirely positive. It's somewhere down there, where they ask people to swab their belly buttons for microbes, and they test this. They also ask people to swab their homes for microbes and send all this into them. And they're doing analysis that way. Well, they realized, like, gosh, it would be a lot better for us if we had some cheap way to get other information from those homes. Climate data loggers, in particular. They're expensive. And so this was a huge barrier to entry. It's the do-it-yourself community. When we partnered up with Instructables, we said, can you create a cheap climate data logger that can be used in these homes so that more information can be shared along with the microbes that are being sent? And that's what they're working on. So we have a challenge, and we have prizes and incentives set up that way to bridge these two communities. Click. I love this example. One of the hardest things for a researcher who has a crowdsourced project to do is to actually come up with the goal and the task. It is really, really difficult, and it's not even a battle anymore. It used to be a battle, too much negotiation, where they wanted to basically put their whole thesis there as the goal. And people don't want that. They just want to know, what's your project about, and what are you asking me to do? So we actually don't give that option to the researcher anymore. We just do it. This is a good example, though. This is Snow Tweets. This is a University of Waterloo research project where these researchers needed a lot of data from real-time ground-based data. What they're doing is they are trying to measure the accuracy, calibrate the accuracy of instruments on satellites. They know that satellite instruments aren't taking into account things like snowdrifts, things that humans can do. The human cognition piece of this becomes really important. So they set up this algorithm where you can tweet your snow measurement where you are. And it gets sent to them, it's put into this live map, and you can start to compare, like, this is pretty cool, this is what I'm getting. Because the numbers are so high there as well, it's easy enough to see, like, okay, 14 people on that block told us that they had 3 inches of snow, and one person said it's 3 feet. I'm pretty sure that one person is wrong. And that will come in because you might be wondering about the quality of data, too. Sometimes it's in the sheer numbers that happen. Click. This is just an idea, another example of the maker group working with citizen science. So they're actually building these CubeSats that get launched into space. Many of them crowdfund their research as well. So they turn to the crowds for a lot of different reasons. In this case, they also put sensors on these little 3x3 CubeSats that are sent out there. Next. Motivations. We heard about some of the incentives and the motivations with the scientific community. They actually tend to be very different, at least now. I don't know. At some point, Arturo might get to be where they're competing for dollars and then they all have turned crooked. But let's see what's happening now. Click. Zooniverse is part of that Galaxy Zoo platform that I mentioned before. So those people involved in there, they know their users, they've surveyed their users, they are there to advance a particular field of research. Astronomy. Next. This is so cute. This one is out of Boston Museum of Science, and it's called the Firefly Watch. It's one of my favorite ones because it's incredibly misleading. It looks so simple and so easy, and it actually technically is very easy to get involved in this project. I do this with my kids. We live in Center City, Philadelphia, and it's so easy to think, well, kids, we don't have fireflies, as many fireflies as when I was growing up because we live in the city. That actually means nothing to them, and it means nothing to science, right? What does that mean? In order to even register for this free project, most of them, almost all of these are free, by the way, you fill out a form that gets you thinking a little bit more critically. So not just where do you live, but do you have man-made water supply? Do they spray for bugs? Do you have artificial lighting? Just these little pieces of the puzzle that start to come together a little bit more. And in this case, this is a fun project. You learn the difference between how to spot a male and a female firefly, and who knew there's a predator that looks just like them until you actually see it, call its mate over, and then destroy the thing. So this is part of more important research, right? So this is a little piece of a climate change study. So this particular researcher is really looking for changes in population and where they might exist in the firefly population because of the ecological impacts of that happening. Next. This is the project that I mentioned that was looking for the cheap climate data loggers. Next. BioCurious, are you all familiar with the do-it-yourself bio movement? That is, it's usually the field that worries people the most because there's a kind of assumption that it's just crazy people getting together and trying to genetically engineer like some new being. Or something. It's really not that yet. It tends to be, yes, who knows where this is going. Right now I'm advocating for it, and you never know. But right now it's just very, very exciting. You know, by and large, these are very intelligent, curious people that for one reason or another did not go on to get a professional science degree. I came to science, as an aside, really late. Science was not for me. In high school, I did well. It was not for me. In college, I was joking around last night. It's amazing that I'm even up here talking to you, just by the very nature of how I chose my college, which was Temple University. You know, I came from a blue-collar family. There was not a lot of guidance involved. There was support, but I made the cheerleading team. That was it. That's the school I'm going to. That's it. Had I had a little more guidance, or some of you, have the benefit of having support and guidance and resources that help drive you towards your scientific career or whatever your career is where you're sitting in this room. We all know a lot of other people that didn't have that opportunity, right? They're still curious. They're looking for reasons to get involved in this stuff. They just need to feel a little bit more entitled, welcome, and invited to the table. So that's what we're trying to do here. Next. This is Gig Walk. This is the one exception where you do get paid for your task. It's a very specific task. I'm not sure anybody here is super excited about advancing fields of research, but this is a really neat application where they've figured out a way to kind of create micro tasks, super specific about what they're asking you to do, and you get paid each time. Mostly corporations use this, but we see a couple of researchers turning to this too, because it's also helps build real accurate data. Next. These are really interesting. So these were not started by professional researchers, but now they have professional researchers working with them. This was from the radiation fallout, measuring the radiation fallout from the earthquake in Japan. And so the first thing that happened is we had a couple of different groups start up their crowdsourcing projects. Hey, let me know what your Geiger counter says, and I'll let you know what mine says. And they started collecting all this information. It's a good example, too, of how multiple groups can kind of compete for the same audience here. But the winner, in the end, was the group who then figured out a way, once all the Geiger counters were sold out, to teach people how to make their own. So there's almost nothing that stops them. They work closely now with the Woodrow Wilson Center for Scholars, by the way. Next. Hand in hand with what I just mentioned. Next. This is fun. This is where the fun stuff happens. This is the intersection of science cheerleaders and citizen science, and I'll show you how that relates to policy in a moment. These are the Pop Warner cheerleaders that I mentioned. So we wanted to do an activity with them, and we decided to set a new Guinness World Record for the world's largest cheer. And we took that home from China, which was done at the Olympics, sponsored by McDonald's. But in this case, we decided to cheer for science. And setting a record is a lot harder than I thought it would be. You have to cheer for 5 minutes. Everybody has to know that cheer. Everybody has to be registered. Everybody has to be in a uniform, and on and on and on. So for 5 minutes, they cheered for science. We did end up setting a world record, but maybe most importantly is that they all got to meet science cheerleaders. Science cheerleaders are current and former NFL and NBA cheerleaders who are also scientists and engineers. Hard to imagine. I did not know they existed. Remember, I am not a scientist, so they actually are science cheerleaders, and I am the fraud in the group, but I own the URL. So there's Heidi. We have Heather, who you'll hear from later, a local science cheerleader. Believe it or not, there's more than 250 that are actively engaged in Science Cheerleader. 250 of these women who volunteer their time to go around. They talk to young girls in particular, 3 million little cheerleaders in the United States. They have the potential to make a real impact. And they, encourage them not to fall into society's stereotypes of what it means to be a female scientist or engineer, or what it means to be a cheerleader. They also encourage them to stay in school, because you'll make, I don't know, Heather, what you made. Mine was $35 a game. There's no way to make a living when you're a cheerleader. And that's a surprise to people. They assume that you're getting money like the NFL and the NBA in some level, and you're not. Remind them that if they want to be a college cheerleader, a professional cheerleader, most of the NFL and NBA teams require you to have a full-time job or be in school full-time. And I don't know if the Bengals were like that, but the Sixers were. And then also how important it is for time management, self-confidence, how to present yourself to people. These are important messages to share. So we weave in the science. While we're doing these appearances, we also weave into the parents' mentality as well, that even without their science degree, they're needed in science. And that's our introduction to some of the citizen science opportunities. In fact, every single appearance that a science cheerleader does, she shines a light on a local citizen science opportunity for people to get involved in. Click. So how we combine our big cheer for science with the citizen science project, Heather was part of this at the USA Science and Engineering Festival in Washington, D.C. last year. We had lots and lots of kids there participate in our Little Cheer for Science. Little did they know, we were working with the USGS. They have a long-term monitoring project. They have sensors in the places where you would expect earthquakes to happen. But with fracking and other developments happening, they're really interested in these microquakes that are starting to happen. So they need sensors out there pretty much everywhere. So we enlisted the help of 75 schools. We sent science cheerleaders to these schools throughout the country to help them lead this cheer for science. We all did it at the same time. I think it was noon, East Coast time, but every school participated at the same time. Every one of those schools is now networked into this long-term monitoring project because they all had to download the software and they all have the sensor there. But the way that we activated this campaign was to get them up cheering. Much better job than I did earlier. But basically a 1-minute cheer. And in Washington, we had a little Richter scale. And we had people from the USGS talking about this. We had science cheerleaders from the Ravens, the Redskins, Washington Wizards, Heather. Some came from other teams as well. Next. This is a fun little video about the Science Cheerleaders. Play.
I cheered for the Houston Texans in 2005, 6, and 7. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in aerospace engineering from Wichita State University, and I currently work at NASA's Johnson Space Center as an engineer.
I like to do the space cowboy dance. Come on, girl.
I come from a family of science. My dad was a chemist.
Oh, I just remember being a little girl, and my parents asked me what I wanted for Christmas, and I said a microscope set.
From a little girl, I remember my mom, she was a registered nurse. She really made a difference in the lives of the patients, and I knew from right then that I wanted to work in healthcare.
What do you want to be? A doctor, a teacher, and a cheerleader.
I am a former Washington Redskins cheerleader. Got an undergraduate degree in molecular biology. I worked at the NIH for a couple years. Then I went to law school at Georgetown University. I was a patent attorney. And after that, I went to medical school at George Washington University. And then I moved to Houston, Texas, and did an internship in general surgery. And now I'm an emergency medicine doctor in Houston, Texas.
I've had about 3 great seasons with the Tennessee Titans, cheerleading for them. I work as a neuroimaging clinical researcher at Vanderbilt University. I graduated with a degree in neuroscience from Vandy, and I'm just happy to be a part of Science Cheerleader and be here.
I really encourage these kids. I'm like, hey, if you like science, go after it.
People tell you to think outside of the box, and I'm like, do more than that. You can live outside of the box.
Science cheerleaders are dynamic,
engaging,
well-rounded women,
and flat out amazing.
Science cheerleaders are smart, they're funny, they're entertaining, they're engaging, but most importantly, they're an incredible source of inspiration to millions of young women. Go Science! You get the point.
We're bustin', we're bustin', we're bustin' down the stereotype. We're bustin', we're bustin', we're bustin' down the stereotype. She's bustin', she's bustin', she's bustin' down the stereotype. She's bustin', she's bustin', she's bustin' down the stereotype. Go Science!
Go Melissa! So that's a little sample of the Science Cheerleaders. And Heather. Next. And we've gotten some money from the National Science Foundation to co-produce. This is kind of ironic. We did a Science of NFL video series with NBC Sports and the NFL. And it was our idea. We got the grants to make this happen, and yet, you know, they weren't comfortable yet using the Science Cheerleaders in the actual videos talking about the science. And I can guarantee you that the cheerleaders on the sidelines know a lot more than the football players that were featured and well scripted in these video series. So we're going back and talking about, well, okay, that was the Science of NFL football series. Now let's look at the TEM and figure out if we can do a series that way. Next. These are some of the activities that the Science Cheerleaders do. So we've created surrogates through the Pop Warner team, through some of the college teams as well. We've developed a series of real science cheers where there are stunts involved there. We have a Science of Cheerleading app coming out where kids can look at some of the cheers being demonstrated, including by the Ravens, one of the only teams with an actual stunt team, so they have men there, which is great. So we do some science cheers, you know, build a pyramid, and this is what happens when the forces are balanced. And then you'd be able to manipulate what happens when the forces are not balanced. So we're looking forward to that. We do a lot of in-school appearances. That's Joe from the Ravens on your bottom left part of the screen there. Next. These are some of the other things that we do. And next. This is a very exciting project that we're working on because it's the first time that we're able to utilize the power of the Science Cheerleaders for their brains. It's actually their research. These are principal investigators now of a research project that we're doing. If you get a chance to go to the science fair, you can participate in this research project known as Project Mercury. This was started by Summer, who you saw in the video earlier, who works at NASA, and a researcher who you did not see, but she's featured, she's the centerpiece of a Today Show segment. Her name is Wendy. She's getting her PhD at UC Davis, biomedical engineering. She just made the Raiders team out there. So she cheered in Atlanta, and she's all over the place. So she loves what she does. But she really felt strongly that science cheerleaders need to start doing research. The combined brain power of these 250 women can be pretty powerful. So what we're working on is a research study that compares microbes on Earth to microbes on the International Space Station. We won a competition, which basically allowed us not to have to pay the $100,000 fee or whatever it is for the payload and the certification to send microbes to the International Space Station in November via SpaceX. So there's two parts to the study. One is to look at heavily populated venues and the population distribution of the microbes there versus the International Space Station, very controlled environment there. The other is to look at the growth rate analysis of the 40 samples that we send here to the space station. Heavily populated venues include NFL and NBA games. So through the Science Cheerleaders, we've already been able to sample the Sacramento Kings game, the San Antonio Spurs game, the Orlando Magic game, the Philadelphia Phillies. We were just there last Thursday collecting samples from those stadiums and getting a lot of people involved in this opportunity. We'll be at the 76ers in the fall, and I'm very excited about this one because this involves shooting stuffed microbes out of that t-shirt bazooka along with sample kits. So if you catch one, it says, hey, lucky you. We need your microbes from your cell phone and your shoe. Do you mind signing this waiver here? And we'll be by to collect those samples from you. And then again, some of these samples will go to the International Space Station, which has been a really good draw in terms of getting new audiences involved in some of this research. Mind you, for a lot of people, it's the first time they've been told, really described, what a microbe is and why it's important and that bacteria can be very good for you. We share the results. This is totally open. So good for the NFL and the NBA for getting behind this too, because we don't know what we're going to find. I suspect it'll be not much in the NBA stadiums in particular because they hose that place down before you walk in and they hose it off when you leave. But the way that we share these results with you is through a heat map. We won a competition also through NASA where they have people get together for a weekend. It's called the NASA Space Apps Challenge, and this was right in line with what we want to do because it's about crowdsourcing again. So they get hackers together all over the world for a weekend. Further east you are, you start, you share your code with the next group that comes in when it's their time to get started. And what they came up with was a visualization tool. So all of this data can be shared through this heat map. So you can see, if you were at the Phillies game, I can't tell you what I found on your cell phone and shoe for IRB reasons, but I can tell you here, we're only collecting 20 samples. Maybe 25, Heather, I'm not sure. We can tell you on a whole what the cluster of patterns were that we found, and you can look at that, and then you can start to play with that data as the user. You might want to find out how the NFL compares to the NBA, or how this all relates to the International Space Station. So we're very excited about that. Hoping to do something with the Patriots. You have 13 Science Cheerleaders. Are you Patriots fans, Giants, or Jets? What's your closest? I know, I'm sorry. It's split. That's what I was worried about. You would think in Philadelphia, I can't even make an assumption that everybody there is an Eagles fan because it's split. Anybody who's not an Eagles fan, like every other team and then the Eagles. So we'll be back. But you have 13 Science Cheerleaders on your Patriots team, which is pretty good. So this is the partnership that we do with UC Davis, SciStarter, and Science Cheerleader. Next. Here we are at the Phillies game collecting samples. We enlist the help of Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Pop Warner. This is a very, very, very simple process for people. Everything's bar-coded. We make it incredibly easy for people to organize these sample collections as well. Over there on the left is Buzz Aldrin. That's one of the Science Cheerleaders who spotted him and said, we need samples from your shoes and cell phone. Do you mind? He didn't mind because he had a drink in his hand. Next. Common factors involved, I'll call them sectors, involved in almost every crowdsourcing project. Just so you understand, there's a lot of thought that go into the good citizen science projects, the ones that remain sustainable. And these are what your question is, or if you're a grassroots organizer doing this, what your community concern is, the level of participation or engagement that you want. Some of these projects involve the volunteers in setting up the research questions and the formulation of how this will be executed. The incentives and the motivations, we looked at some of those reasons earlier. The appropriate use of technology, decidedly, Project Mercury is low tech. You don't even have to look at the the results that we have if you don't want to. But we had the option of making a fancy app for the collection part of this. And we actually realized that's going to be a barrier to entry to too many people, not because they don't have cell phones, but because they're there for a game. This was sprung on them, so we need to make it super easy for them to be able to participate. The qualification, the certifications of the people that are getting involved. There are some citizen science projects that are incredibly difficult, and that's okay. They're looking for very specialized volunteers to get involved in those projects. The quality of data, which is certainly should be a concern to everybody running a project. So it's up to the researcher to organize that project and set it up in a way that there are some filters put in place there for, occasional people who want to just mess up your data, which is not that common actually, and how you might want to set forth standards. Ownership of the data. With the project that we're doing, it's everybody's data. It's public, it's out there. It's anybody's to draw upon. Some have more concern with that, and we heard from Arturo about wanting to publish first. So there are some projects that share lots of data, but not everything. So they can publish first. Policy implications of some of this work. So now what? Now what with us? What happens if we do find out, which we're not NFL and NBA, we're not gonna find anything bad in your stadium, so keep working with us. But let's say something horrible happened at one of these places and we find something. Like there's implications for some of the work that we're uncovering. How does that relate to policy, and what is incumbent upon us to do in those situations? There's easier connections to policy when you're talking about some of the nature projects and the environmental concerns. Like you're collecting data now. You actually have proof of something that you may have suspected. And that data is so powerful to be able to go to policymakers with and say, it's not in my head. I'm not making this up. Look what we found. Look what 100,000 people found that we can replicate. Next. I love this quote. Citizen science has helped democratize science and help people understand that they can have an influence on science by being part of it, which is true. It still felt like something else was missing. So now it's fun. You participated in somebody's research. You just did work for free for them. What do we do with them? This goes back to the thinking of, if there's a mechanism in place that allows the public to be part of these very important, let's say, federal level policy, science policy conversations, if we put that in place and we're able to draw upon the citizen scientists, this informed group of people participating in there, will it work? I mean, is this just made up? Can this actually happen? So the first thing was looking at ways, because there was no mechanism put in place. In the healthcare field, it's a little bit different. It's actually an anomaly, because you probably have patient advocacy groups and others that are strong and well organized and can help make some influence. But for most other fields, it's willy-nilly. You don't really know where your on-ramp is if you're just like an average person. So let's look at what's happening here. Next. Start a campaign, of course. So this is the OTA. There's a cheer for it. Hey, what do you say? Let's bring back the OTA with citizen input, which when I was very naive and meeting with members of Congress, including Ted Kennedy, Newt Gingrich, Rush Holt, and others, it was very clear to me that they thought it would be a good idea to bring the OTA back. But the citizen input part still was a mystery to people. And, well, I guess from the professional science organizations within the Beltway, I got the distinct impression that it's a good idea to bring the OTA back. And that cute little thing you're doing with the citizen input, we'll add that on later. You just go get people to support us getting our jobs back. With the OTA, this will be great. But I never actually felt comfortable or confident that they would take that citizen input part seriously. So, next. We move from citizen science to citizen policy in this next slide that looks so boring, but this is really the heart of the issue. The group that was founded, it's a network. Instead of the OTA, we now have a distributed outside of the Beltway organization called ECAST, Expert and Citizen Assessment of Science and Technology. The founding partners are Science Cheerleader and SciStarter, Arizona State University, Boston Museum of Science, Loca Institute, which is not far from here actually, UMass Amherst, and the Woodrow Wilson Center for Scholars. So how did these groups all come together? Partly because there were some really smart people at ASU writing about these issues. These were the people, these were the authors of the papers that I was writing about, and I just contacted them and said, you actually had the idea to revive the OTA with citizen input, but I did not know actually that as an academic, you can just write papers and then move on to your next subject. That would drive me crazy. I'm like, no follow-up, okay, well let's see, and maybe we'll just do some follow-up here, and it was just bringing them, dragging them kind of back together and saying, we can make this happen in some form or fashion. So all these were the really smart people writing about these issues and kind of saying, what if? And here's some lessons that we can learn from other countries. So physically coming together and figuring out a model was unbelievably exciting. So what we do is we work through Boston Museum of Science as the leader of a network of science centers. And what they do so well is the outreach. How we've designed this is to actually have public deliberations, carefully orchestrated public deliberations. We've done one pilot test so far in 4 different sites: Boston Museum of Science, the Koshel Museum in Washington, D.C., Arizona State University, and Colorado School of Mines. Decidedly, geographically specific areas with different types of people. No fewer than 100 participants, carefully vetted. These participants came for 8 hours to become informed on a topic. We were very opportunistic. It wouldn't have been the topic I would have chosen because I like the idea of technology assessment and getting out in front of an issue. In this case, we piggybacked off of the worldwide views on biodiversity. So we were the US voice for the worldwide views on biodiversity, and we did it through ECAST. 100 participants in each one of these groups. They get plenty of information. They have experts there talking about the issues, and it's broken up into these chunks. The chunks are there so that there's dialogue coming back. At the end of these conversations, which is not an easy task, it's to help aggregate the now informed input of these citizens. And when I say regular citizens, I mean in Washington, D.C., they had homeless people there that were unbelievably articulate and somehow tweeted out stuff that we were doing there, which was a good thing. They were sharing. They were so excited, so valued to be part of these conversations. We made it known to them, too, that we don't know what the outcome is going to be of this. We don't know what the policy implications are. We hope that we get to a point where this just becomes, this becomes status quo, where people are able to get together, talk about a topic that's important to them, that they have scientists and the experts listening and helping to inform them, listening as well to what they're saying, and together this information is delivered to Congress or policymakers. In our case, we delivered it to Washington through a briefing at the Woodrow Wilson Center for Scholars. So just to, again, describe, the Museum of Science leads the science museums in saying, here's how we do the outreach, here's how we do the recruitment, here's how we do the actual day-long effort. Arizona State University recommends the methodologies and then does the evaluation. So next time we do this, we can learn from things we didn't do so well or be able to capitalize on the things that did go well. The Woodrow Wilson Center for Scholars helps to put all this together in white paper and in language that makes sense to policymakers. We're now working on a series of meetings, individual meetings with Hill staffers and representatives to say, this is what we did. Here's how this can feed into your existing system. The existing system right now, without the Office of Technology Assessment, if you ask a congressperson, by the way, they feel that they actually have too much scientific advice coming to them, way too much in some cases. So it's overwhelming and it's paralyzing to them. What they do is they have authorized and they have appropriated funds to the Government Accountability Office to pick up some of the slack that OTA used to do. So they turn to them and they say, tell us what's happening with 3D printing. How is that going to affect manufacturing? We need to get some good insights here. And that's a perfect example of, you have that foresight, you know what your topic is, Congress wants this information, they just asked the GAO to do this. The complementary part of this would be the public participation. Now we have a model that can be used and distributed to all these other sites. This is basically a toolkit that has been set up for others. So getting ahead of these issues and being able to deliver both of those pieces of information, so the expert analysis with the complementary public participation, is what should be delivered to the policymakers as they're looking for some of this stuff. And why this works well in other countries is partly for the trust. So now you're starting to look at what people who don't always have their, what they think, hand out for more money for research, right? What the general public is thinking. And it's very, very, very important for risk assessment issues. So that's what I'm working on now. Next. This I described already. There's a site there if you want to download the final report that we did. Oh yes, we'll also be having a series of Capitol Hill briefings on this topic as well. And it's ECAST Network, just a WordPress blog. That's where you can get all the archived information, some videos that were up there as well. And you can see the purpose of this. So again, this is called Participatory Technology Assessment. Prepared by ECAST members, the primary motivation was to articulate the role that a network like ECAST might play in conducting and institutionalizing PTA in the United States. Next. And this is true. I think if you can help people rediscover, do, and shape science in particular, we can mobilize one of our greatest resources, which is all of us, the public. And before I end it, I would love to introduce a local science cheerleader, Heather Crockett-Washington, who will tell us more about herself. Thank you.
Hello. Ready for another cheer? I guess I'll spare you for now, maybe later. So I'm Heather Crockett-Washington. I'm a science cheerleader living right here in Connecticut. I remember a friend of mine called me. She saw a segment on CNN about the science cheerleaders, and she thought of me. She just couldn't believe there was another person out there like me that had a career in science and also was a professional cheerleader. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I am a dentist. I work at Community Health Center, Inc. in Middletown. I also have a master's in public health from Yale. Dental public health is my passion. I want to eliminate oral health disparities. My interest in science, unlike Darlene, goes way back as far as I can remember. I remember asking for a microscope 3 years in a row when I finally got one, 1 year for Christmas. I dreamed of going to space camp during the summer, and I just had a fascination with the human body, anatomy, and physiology. I also had a love for dance. I was captain of my cheerleading and dance teams in high school. I started a dance troupe when I went to college, and that troupe still exists today. And I was also an NFL cheerleader with the Cincinnati Bengals, which was an amazing experience, cheering at Paul Brown Stadium in front of 60,000 fans, performing. I was kind of a shy child, so dance was my way to improve my confidence and be able to get in front of people. And Science Cheerleader is a way to playfully challenge the stereotypes. So many people say, you're a cheerleader, wait a minute, you're a dentist. My cheerleading friends couldn't believe I wanted to go to dental school. My dental colleagues couldn't believe I was an NFL cheerleader. So this is our way to playfully challenge those stereotypes. And it's so great to meet some of the young girls who are cheerleaders and to get them interested and fascinated in science as well. So science cheerleaders are also actively involved in science. The Project Mercury that Darlene was talking about, collecting the microbes, we're collecting some today, so you can meet me at the science fair and we can swab your shoe or your cell phone to be a part of the study. And I look forward to meeting some of you there, so if you have questions about Science Cheerleader, want to learn more about it, come visit me at the science fair. You can also visit our website, sciencecheerleader.com, and find out if your favorite sports team has a science cheerleader. So I look forward to meeting many of you.